it's been an amazing journey since the beginning. Some of the folks that were there taking action to establish our community forests are still in the industry, leading the industry today within the contractors today. But that act of, saying this is our forest and we're going to do that, that was healing in and of itself. The relationships that were formed, for better or worse, what I've come to realize is that the forestry industry as a whole is a very tight-knit community. Everybody seems to know everybody. And so there's a very amazing opportunity to work together so that reconciliation can be at least a path, dare I say, a path we can carve out through the forest, so that we can work together as to what this looks like.
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Christoph, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Now, today's episode is with Westbank First Nation's Community Forest, and it's kind of a continuation, honestly, of last episode with Gary Merkel. Last episode we talked a bunch about Indigenous forestry and reconciliation and how Indigenous forestry differs from traditional forest techniques and that kind of thing. And this was just a serendipitous event that I happened to be talking to these folks right after Gary, and I'm able to share this right afterwards, and it provides some real concrete examples of what Gary and I were talking about. And so today I spoke with Dave Gill, who is the general manager of forestry for the Westbank First Nations Community Forest, and we're also speaking with Jordan Coble, and he is the director and president of the organization that manages the community forest as well. Both really awesome speakers, both really able to put forth the vision that they had for this community forest, and it was just awesome to listen to them talk about it. Jordan talks a lot about the healing of the community, the reconciliation that happened, the values that went into planning, and how those differ, and also just his excitement around this whole opportunity for collaboration and reconciliation and all that kind of stuff. Is really, really inspiring to listen to him talk. And Dave really breaks down the specifics around forest management, using Indigenous values as the core for that, and how that kind of differs, and how the mindset changes, and how and also his own personal learning experience and journey through this. So an awesome conversation. You're going to learn a whole bunch. I know I did. I can't wait to share it with you. Sponsors for this episode are the same as always. West Fraser is the number one sponsor for 2022. I cannot thank them enough for all of their support. It has been so helpful, and I just can't thank them enough. Thank you, West Fraser. And Greenlink Forestry is also a sponsor. They've been with me since the beginning, and again, can't thank them enough for all of their support over the years. Damaged Timber is the final sponsor. You can go to damagetimber.com and put your forest 10 at checkout to get 10% off everything they got going on. They're really exciting. They sell damaged timber that you can put in your kitchen. If you want to find out what that is, go to the website. Anyways, here we go. Talking more about Indigenous forestry with Westbank First Nation Community Forest in British Columbia. Dave, why don't we start with you? How did you get into forestry? Why is forestry something that you decided to dedicate your life to, and why for Westbank First Nation?
What a question. I first started thinking about forestry back actually when I was in high school. For much different reasons than I think about forestry now. Back in high school, I just wanted a job that was outside, ideally outside in the forest. And, that's what really got me thinking about forestry at that point in time. Like every kid in high school, at least at that time, we went through these tests with your counselors, and your counselors made you answer these questions. And And from the answers that you provided, they determined what job and what career you should be pursuing. And so my counselor said, you should be an oyster grower, a brewery master, or a forester. How they came up with those, I have no idea. And
I think I was supposed to be a window washer or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I set my sights high on forestry, and I got my first job up in Hickson, British Columbia, just south of Prince George. And I spent the summer collecting spruce bark beetles and working for the Pacific Research Forest Center out of Victoria, even though I was based up in Hickson. And that kind of hooked me. And halfway through the summer, I applied to forestry and got in there. Nice. So that was the initial reason why I entered forestry. Nothing like mind blowing or anything like that. That was the sole reason I actually got into the program. And fast forward 25 years or so from there to when the opportunity with Westbank came up. I looked at that as an opportunity to be involved in perhaps a transition in the way forestry happens within our province. And Westbank First Nation has always been a community that I've really respected, in that they seem to be, at that point in time, they seem to be a very forward-thinking community. And I was aware of their community forest and the struggles that were undertaken to obtain that community forest, and I really respected that. And I thought, hey, Dave, I mean, you've been trying to do the same thing. You've been doing the same thing for your whole career here. Let's try something different. And, within months of me joining Westbank First Nation in their forestry program, my whole forestry paradigm was turned upside down. I was on my head for a year afterwards, just trying to think about everything that I learned throughout my career and my education. And a lot of that wasn't making sense anymore. Whether it was fire, whether it was what we were doing on the land. And I remember clearly one day I was out in a community forest. It was a beautiful summer day, and I was walking through this forest, and I started thinking, I said, we just had a meeting with a working group here in the Okanagan that consists of some traditional knowledge keepers and elders and other community members. And I was on the land and thinking, this is the first time I've actually realized that I'm on unceded land. I'm making a decision on land that I don't own, on land that belongs to people that I'm just getting to know. And, what are the consequences of what I'm doing here? And, it sort of really flipped something in my head that I got to think about the way I've been doing things much differently. So I joined WFN because I thought I could do something different, and we are doing something different. And I'm just so happy and so honored to be here in this position and seeing us making a difference on the land. It's very empowering and it's very rewarding. So
that's
I'll
awesome.
Stop there.
I love that. No, that's great. It's interesting to hear your story of discovery. I like that. I think that's a powerful story for other forest management folks to hear and to realize that you had this kind of transition happen in your life. That's cool. Thanks. Appreciate that, Dave. And Jordan, I don't know much about you besides you're a director and a president of this, and I kind of want to just know your background a little bit, and then why and how you got involved with the community forest stuff.
Yeah, sure. I'm Jordan. I'm a Westbank First Nation member. Have been my whole life. I've been elected to council since 2019, and really, my connection with forestry is very basic, to say the least. I don't have the same kind of knowledge at all as our foresters, as Dave does. My first experience with a forester, I remember I was in elementary school, and the teacher brought in a forester, and he started talking about, the work that he does. And I remember the one question I had was, do you support clear cutting, or are you for or against it? And the teacher kind of looked at me going like, what? And it's in grade 4. She's like, what the heck is this kid talking about? And then from there, that was my first kind of like, okay, well, he didn't really have a good response. He said, there's reasons to do forestry, and there's, money to be made in the industry, and we want to make sure there's professionals. And I was like, well, that's not really the question or the answer I was looking for. And so, from there, I wasn't really super interested in it, because I saw it as Dave mentioned, kind of that boxed approach to forestry, and literally let's make boxes in the forest, and then out of the forest. And so it wasn't until, I started to kind of reclaim my own indigeneity. I grew up on the reserve here, but it's a pretty, urbanized reserve. I didn't, get to do many of the traditional practices as many as of my family members did. But I'd still spend time on the land, and I understood the value of the natural resources that surround us, and the value of the interconnectedness between all those resources. So as I was nominated and then elected to council, part of the responsibilities is to our corporate side, and one of those corporate entities is our natural resources limited partnership, their NRLP. And I was asked to join the board, and I love the land, and I really, and it might sound a little childish, but I really want to be that voice for the trees, the voice for the land itself, the voice for the water, and all the things that haven't had a voice up until this point, or a limited voice at the very least. And so I was hesitant, because I'm an honest person, and I try to stay humble, and I to be completely honest, I don't know much about forestry. I didn't know much about forestry when I joined the team, and I was just kind of a little overwhelmed at first. But at the same time, I pride myself in being a willing learner and a quick learner. And like I said, I already had the knowledge that there's value in our forests as is, not just as a resource to be taken. And so I talked to our chief at the time, and he asked me if I was going to join. I said, well, sure, but as long as you respect the voice that I'm going to bring to the table, because it's not going to be a pro industry, a pro chop down the trees approach. It's going to be a stewardship value approach, or take away that idea of management, more of an interconnected relationship approach. And he welcomed me onto the board, and there's been some transitions, and eventually I was basically appointed to be the president of this company.
You got the vision.
I had the vision, I guess, but by that time I'd been able to spend a good amount of time with Dave, and another good friend of ours, and he's in our corporate entity now, but he's always been a mentor to me, is Mick Worstjuk, and he's just shared the story of our forestry company and how it came to be, the work that was there, the fights that were fought, and the actions that were taken to ensure that we were stewarding our lands the best way we could at that time. And just seeing the transition, being involved in the background, just as an interested, community member. But then as soon as I started to, really put my heart into it, I really started to see value in what the potential is. Not just what we're already doing, as Dave mentioned. What we're doing is amazing, and has been amazing for a number of years, but the potential as to how we can even make it better, and the openness to work with the team that says, yeah, let's do it. There's going to be, we've had some very frank discussions about the cost of doing forestry our way. Right. And the support that was there, understanding that was there, is tremendous. And so it was really just my love for the forestry industry came just through firsthand experience, firsthand working with the Dave Gills and the Mick Worstjuks of our community, and just falling in love with the land again.
That's awesome. I love that. That's incredible. And I think it's important that you brought out that outside perspective, right? The maybe you're not traditionally educated in forestry, but you still had, I think the important thing is those values, right? Yeah. Having that value of ecological integrity, of wanting to create sustainable landscapes and continue to work with sustainable landscapes forever, right?
Exactly.
I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, the educational journey. Like you said, my formal background is definitely not in forestry, but from our community, I helped create our museum. But my background isn't history either. So
Right.
it's really rooted just in our traditional knowledge. It's rooted in spending time with our elders, learning my language. That's where those values come out from. That's where the laws that I know to be true from our community and our nation perspective, I know that that's where they're rooted from. And my role in all of this, I see as making sure that we uphold those values, making sure that we uphold those laws and reinstitute those laws when we can, and make sure that everyone around us is aware that we are the rightful stewards of our lands.
Love it. That's very cool. Very, very cool. Very exciting. Like, I think it's hard to find these concrete examples of where things are changing and just the mindset's changing around forestry. I think this is a really interesting example of that. I think a lot on this podcast have been talking about what's possible, maybe the mindset, what we could do, but this is the first time I think we've had real concrete examples from you guys. So let's just dive right into it, because I know, Jordan, you only got another 30 minutes or so. How does this situation differ from other community forests? How would you begin to paint a picture for someone about how, Indigenous management of a community forest differs from, say, a non-Indigenous management area? How do the values come into play? How does it change things? I know that's a big question, but let's just start with the basics, kind of the planning process, maybe, right? Like, how does this differ? I don't know, Dave or Jordan, whoever wants to take that one, whoever feels passionate about it.
I think we both feel passionate about it, but hey, Jordan, do you want to start that, or?
Sure, I'll start, but I'm only going to say, it's the work on the land is healing for our people. We as Westbank members, we know that we've been colonized. We know that we're impacted by colonization on a daily basis, and we know that our connection to the land has been taken away from us. And for generations, we've been saying we need to get back on the land. And forestry, as Dave mentioned, that's why he wanted to get into forestry, is to be on the land. And so the stewardship responsibilities go beyond working with, just our resources team, our NRLP team, and working with our contractors, boots on the ground, saws on the trees kind of work. It's actually getting the community members out there, getting them passionate about what's going on, and getting them interacting with the land in itself, knowing what we have, knowing what has been taken, and knowing what our limitations are as of right now, but knowing that there's a way forward to break down barriers. And so for me, the stewardship responsibilities that come with our community involvement is an act of healing for our people. It's bringing our elders back to the land. It's bringing our children to the land, digging their hands in the soil, and just, like I said, for myself, just falling in love with the land again. And I think when you have that love and that passion, you'll be willing to stand up for it. You'll be willing to fight for it, and you'll be willing to, whatever that means, sacrifice a little bit, invest in a little more strength so that we can keep this movement moving. Whatever it might be, but you have to make sure the interest is there in the community first. And the best way to do that is to actually get them out on the land itself. So that's where I'll pass it over to Dave and see what he can add to that.
That's interesting. I like that a lot. That's really, I want to touch back on that after Dave's finished.
Well, it's hard to follow up on what Jordan just said.
Yeah,
but I think the premise is really looking at the land and the forest as not the commodity that we traditionally, I shouldn't use the word traditionally, but in the industrial context, we look at the forest as a commodity rather than what's really out there, and everything that is, as Jordan mentioned, is interconnected with those trees, whether it's in the air, in the trees, on the ground, or under the ground. It's all connected in some form or another. From a planning perspective, I first started here and I wondered, well, what does the community want? And I took the approach of sending out a questionnaire and asking the community for some feedback on forestry. I got a little bit of feedback, and it was enough to start. But over the past few years, we've been able to get out on the land more with the elders, with family groups, with the youth, and getting that feedback on the land has been much more valuable. The approach that I then take is making decisions based on what the land tells you to do rather than what a regulation tells you to do. It's different everywhere. Our province, like you mentioned at the beginning, is so diverse, but even within our community forest, the land is so diverse. I mean, we have areas within the ponderosa pine bunchgrass ecosystem all the way up into the Engelmann spruce subalpine fir ecosystems, and vastly different between them. And you can't take a broad-brushed approach everywhere. You have to be on the land to make the right decision. And we've been moving so far away from that in forestry over the last 20 years or so. And, you know, I can understand that. I mean, technology has improved so much, but really to be on the land is the only way that you can make a really informed decision as far as I'm concerned. So that's one of the reasons I love my job too, is I get that opportunity to do that. You know, historically a forester moves up through the ranks over his career or her career. And as that happens, less and less are you out in the field and actually on the
Right.
land. You're making decisions based on what you see on your computer and what other people are telling you. So that whole concept of planning is so different too. And where we've taken it, and it's one way of being able to, I don't know if the right word is to manage it, but to basically understand what the land is telling us and then getting that on paper on some sort of map or something along those lines, so we can actually take a look at the community forest and see where the most appropriate uses are for the land, whether it's land that should be managed. I should maybe not use that word, but land that should be stewarded for old forests versus land that can be used for forest management more in the timber production kind of way. So it's a process, and it's been ongoing here since I started, and it'll continue on until the next manager takes over, and the next manager will run with it, and our plans will always be getting better over time.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like that. It's funny how you say that, right? Like you started this whole thing, Dave, by walking into the community and be like, "Hey, what do you guys want?" And it's probably tough to get engagement with, you know, they don't know who you are or what you're going to be like. And over time, you build that relationship, and you probably start to get some real collaboration, real communication. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that it's going so well. That's great. And seeing as Jordan only's got a limited amount of time, I want to get into the details, Dave, with you forestry wise, maybe after he's gone. Jordan, you were talking earlier about getting elders back in the land, getting the community re-engaged with the land in a way that, in a forestry context. And you were saying how it was reinvigorating the community and that kind of thing. Can you go into more detail about that? Because I think that's an interesting point, right? Like talking about the colonialization, or sorry, I don't know why I messed that word up so bad, but the colonization aspect, right? And the impact that's had on the community. And then this desire, like you said, that you had, I'm going to mess this word up too, re-indigenized yourself or something you had said,
Yeah.
your re-indigenization. Yeah. Those are all fascinating ideas and concepts that I think, using Westbank First Nations as an example, I think forestry has the ability to be that bridge between the Western society and First Nations, that to maybe create that collaboration and have, you know, make sure that First Nations folks have the ability to reconnect and you know what I mean, the opportunity to do those kind of things and aren't halted by Western society in some way or another. So, I just want to talk about the culture and the detail and how this has reinvigorated your community.
Oh yeah, well, it's been an amazing journey since the beginning. You know, some of the folks that were there taking action to establish our community forests are still in the industry, leading the industry today within their contractors today. But that act of, you know, saying this is our forest and we're going to do that, that was healing in and of itself. The relationships that were formed, for better or worse, you know, what I've come to realize is that the forestry industry as a whole is a very tight-knit community. Everybody seems to know everybody. And so there's a very amazing opportunity to work together so that reconciliation can be at least a path, dare I say, a path we can carve out through the forest, so that we can work together as to what this looks like. Because when I speak to the folks that are in the industry, none of them ever wanted to take food off anyone else's table. The work that we want to do is to make sure that we're ensuring there's going to be food on the table for generations to come, and that coming to realization, I think, was a huge act of healing within our community and our relationship building opportunities here in the Okanagan, because as soon as it's pretty easy, and I'm just going to say this, it's pretty easy for folks to get caught up in the media whirlwind as to what's taking place on the land when it comes to activism that's happening. And so people can feel threatened when there's a moment of action being taken, and they kind of jump to a conclusion is that, oh, they're trying to take it over so that we can't take part in this anymore. And the reality is, when I think about our traditional governance structure, it was based on hundreds and thousands of people working together, making sure that we're all acknowledging each and everyone's individual responsibilities, but making sure we're interconnecting those responsibilities for the future generations. And today we don't have the same amount of people and the same populations in our Indigenous communities. And so when it comes to stewarding the lands, we do need help. And so that active healing comes when you start to take these actions and then having those open and honest discussions as to what this truly means. And that, like I said, we're not here to take food off people's plates and tables that have been in the industry for their entire lives. We're here to make sure that they understand that we want their children, great grandchildren, and many generations to come to be able to do the same practices they were doing, but do it in a way that's more conducive to truly sustainable forestry practices. And so the relationship building aspect, there's healing there, working with licensees and other tenure holders, and creating those relationships is already there. And it starts right in the educational process. Those foresters that go to school together, and then they select their own, corporations that they want to work with afterwards. And sometimes there's competitions there, and sometimes there's relationships. And we just got to figure out what that really looks like. From a community perspective, like I said, it's all about getting the people back on the land. One thing that I know to be true is that, and you've already mentioned it, Matt, that, engagement is great to seek. It's not always, a fruitful kind of endeavor. You get some perspectives
Right.
that are provided, but it sometimes is limited, and you got to make a decision based on that limited perspective. And so it can be difficult at times, and there are people that are very passionate, and even in the Indigenous communities, there's still people that want to make money, right? And that's something that we have to acknowledge, that we can't, as much as we don't want to take food off anyone else's table, we definitely don't want to take food off our own tables. And so how do you find that balance of getting people on the land and doing the work that they want to do, that they're passionate about doing and they love doing, with making sure that they're doing it in a way that's respectful to all the living creatures in the area, all the other trees that serve as homes for those folks. And there's been an adjustment in our practices with our own contractors here that had to be acknowledged, but it's necessary. And so when they understand that, and when they start to take pride in the work that they do and how they do it, not just as an Indigenous person, but as a forester, it really starts to open up opportunities for, young Indigenous people that don't necessarily see their indigeneity as a profession, beyond your traditional kind of cultural representation. They don't see that as something that is, you can add to your resume to say, I bring this specific piece of knowledge. And now when we can do our practices in a way that's more conducive to, what our traditional sustainability practices were, people can say that, hey, I am Indigenous and I know something about these lands. I've hunted these territories. I've, harvested from this area. And so I want to make sure that these resources are here for the future. And I can still make a dollar while I'm doing it. Well, that is just something that's even just amazing for people. And what I see the most value in at this time is, for our community at least, is the grassroots, like I said, getting the elders and the children back on the land, doing some replanting, some reharvesting, some of the silviculture work that's out there, and taking ownership of that, I guess you could say, saying, I planted that tree or I planted that huckleberry bush, and I'm going to make sure that my grandchildren are going to be able to pick from that bush or chop that tree down in the future when the time is right, whatever it might be. But that's for them to decide. But, they're starting to be, I think stewardship isn't just for me, and I'm really hesitant to use it now because apparently stewardship isn't the most appropriate term anymore. But for me, it's not just saying this is mine and this is what we have a right to do. It's the responsibility for protecting those lands and the responsibility to say, I'm going to uphold my values as an individual, and my individual values are the same as my neighbors. And all of a sudden we have this community that's built that's now working with the forest, but at the same time protecting it.
Yeah. I love that. That's, excuse me. That's such a powerful story, right? I think that's what people want to hear, right? Like when you hear that about that potential, about when all of a sudden, when the whole community, when everyone's engaged in this process of forest stewardship, all of a sudden everybody gets what they need and what they want, and nothing needs to be sacrificed. When everyone's at the table, everyone's planning together and everyone's being heard, right? And I think that's a lot of what has gotten some forestry practices into trouble. And that, like you said, like every forester I know they got into this because of the love of the forest. They want it to be sustainable. They didn't get into it because they love 2x4s is what I like to say, right? They got into this because they want the forest to thrive and do well. And we have our own, me as like a Western person, have our own definitions of what that looks like and our own ideas and traditions. And then I think now with First Nations culture becoming more on the radar, and I think we're starting to have this discussion about public involvement. It makes a big difference. All of a sudden, examples like you guys, or even non-Indigenous examples, like for example, Wells Gray Community Forest, right, where their community is involved, and similar things going on, just not in the First Nations sense as much. They're all exciting ideas, and it just makes me excited for the potential that does exist here. And like, hey guys, we can still, like, first and foremost, resource extraction is inevitable. We're people, we consume. That's just what the nature of it. But we can do it in a way that doesn't deplete the landscape at the same time. So I love hearing this kind of stuff where you guys are trying something new and you're cutting new territory, right? You're cutting the path for people behind you and making an example. And it's just really, really exciting to see what you guys are up to.
We take a lot of pride in our work, that's for sure. And I think that pride is starting to bleed into the community, and it's still forestry is still a kind of a dangerous word. When there's still that assumption, forestry is just, people jump to the conclusion that it's clear cutting, and so it's. It's interesting to see that perspective change within our First Nation communities. It's interesting to see the perspective starting to change at the political level as to what forestry can be. But the real excitement comes from the corporate level right now in regards to where reconciliation can go, because it's one thing to uphold the laws and the values of an Indigenous community, recognize that at a political level, but it's one thing to say, you know what, as much as the government may or may not be doing this, as a corporation, we're going to recognize it anyways, and we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's what's going to drive that political will at the end of the day. So, we definitely need those partnerships. We definitely need those collaborations to support this movement. And like I said before, it's not just incorporating Indigenous values, it's upholding them, making sure that they are the rightful stewards of the land. Whatever territory you're going into, it has to be done at a local level. They can't do this blanket approach to forestry anymore. It's not conducive to healthy environments, healthy communities, and healthy relationships.
Yeah. I think that's the same conclusion that George and I came up with, was just that, around communities, there needs to be community forests, because they have the specificity around their areas to engage with all of those user groups and do what's best for them. And then in those more quote unquote wilderness areas, you can start to have more traditional forestry approaches, perhaps, right? But you have to have that public engagement is key at this point. Like it's not gonna exist the way it has in the past without that public engagement thing. We definitely need it. It's part of it. It's crucial. So how about like talking about the First Nations values and applying those to forestry practices? how does that start to fit in, right? What does that look like? So if you're like for example, maybe what you guys want to tell me, like what kind of values you guys are putting on the table as far as stuff you want to manage for actively, that are, kind of prioritized as high priorities when you guys are going through your plan and coming up with a harvest plan and that kind of thing.
That's definitely a Dave question.
Sure, Dave. Yeah, but I think that's the thing. It starts with the planning, right? Like you want to get wood from the forest. Okay, so how do we do this in a way that we can protect all these First Nations values and other values in the landscape, and how does that look compared to, say, like Wells Gray or something like that?
Okay, well, obviously I cannot be as eloquent as Jordan, but I'll give it my best shot here.
I believe in you. You got this.
I believe in you too, Dave.
Planning can't be done at the block level. Planning has to be done at the landscape level.
Right.
We have to look at the broader landscape and come up with a plan before we can be confident in any kind of block level plan. And just my understanding of what I've heard since I've started working with the Silk people is that water is the most important value on the land, and that everything revolves around water. So when we developed our landscape level plan, that was the highest value. And we can identify where water is on the land. We have recently, well, I guess it's been 5 or 6 years now, flown LiDAR over our entire community forest. And that really is a good tool to enable us to look at where water is, or where water may have been, or where water may go. And then field confirming that, we can actually develop a network of what we call old forest, an old forest zone, for lack of a better word right now, where we will be using those characteristics of old forests to protect water. We live in a part of the world where watersheds can be mismanaged to the point where our spring runoffs and peak flows are just causing damage downstream. And we have to manage those watersheds in a way in which we can return to historic flow regimes through different types of management, whether it's through small patch openings or just letting an area rest for a while. But water was definitely the most predominant value in which what we look at as far as the planning component goes. And that being said, once you've taken care of water, you take care of many other values that are associated with water. So if we've identified water as the highest value on the land, many of the other values that are associated with water, such as wildlife or connectivity, routes for ungulates, those values are often taken care of if you're taking care of the water. So that was, I guess, the way that we started it as far as putting together the landscape plans that we have, and moving forward, we discover more values by being on the land, and then you're always adjusting and revising your plan. I've said this before to some other people, that the worst plan you can have is a plan that you finish. So our plan is a plan that is constantly evolving as we get more knowledge of the land, and we get more community values associated with different portions of the community forest that community members may know better than us within NTTEEC. And like I said earlier, that plan will get passed down from manager to manager and get better as it goes, to better reflect the changing values of the community and the changing values on the land, whether that's through climate change or through wildfires or anything that has an impact on the land. So I guess that's the foundation of our planning concept. I guess once we understand community values, and the key is that for myself, I'll never fully understand community values. I'll work hard to do that, but it's an ongoing learning process that never ends. And to actually ever say that I fully understand the community values would be a false statement. I don't think I ever will. But as we can carry on with this, the responsibility that's finally coming back to the communities to take care of the land, that learning and that knowledge will build over time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like that. That's interesting because my intention with that question was to try and get an idea for how the planning begins, and I think that painted a great picture, right? Because I got the gist from what you guys were saying was that you're trying to balance out everything, right? You're trying to be stewards of the land as opposed to primarily, harvesters of wood. So
the planning begins basically through understanding of the values of the community.
Yeah,
and that's the initiation point. And as an industrial forester prior to coming to Westbank, I mean, the planning was initiated by the forest companies that I've worked for. The intent was good, but the intent was always focused on timber, and everything else, values, were considered constraints. So placing community values ahead of everything else and opening up your mind to that allows you to plan for the community rather than plan for feeding a mill, for example.
Love it. No, that tells an excellent story. That's really, really cool. Thanks, Dave. I want to give Jordan one last chance to punch in if he has something to say. He's got to go here shortly. Jordan, do you have anything you want to add here before you got to take off?
No, I just thought, Dave, you're way more eloquent than you give yourself credit for.
Yeah, that's what I said too. He's been thinking about this long enough.
No, exactly. What he's saying is exactly true, right? If you start with the basic form of life, the water of life, then you're there. And that, this is where we may or may not know it, but that's where we're upholding our traditional laws. The word that we use for water, seal, is a law in and of itself. It doesn't just translate to water. It translates to that resource that is a responsibility to maintain for people and for animals. And we often forget about the animal aspect of that. We think we're people, we're human beings, and so we're often ego driven, and so we always think about ourselves first. But that reality is that if you start to take care for those, and this goes in many different industries. You can apply this to the military. If you think about your least strongest performer as the base value of your team, then you're taking care of everybody. So when we think about our water, we think about those little, the landscape that's there. Yeah, we can think, okay, well, let's replenish some fish stocks here. And okay, are we going to base the success as to whether or not there's fish here, or that the grizzly bears came back because there's fish here, or other animals that are thriving because of that work. And then what are the extra values, the added values on that? But then that also leads to the idea of true stewardship, because as much as I'll say it's not just the rights of Indigenous peoples to be on the land and to hunt and to fish and to do forestry, it's a responsibility. At the end of the day, we still need those rights recognized. And so when we can start to have these values upheld and say, you know what, we're not just looking at our own cup block, we're looking at neighboring cup blocks, because what we do here is going to affect our neighbors over there, or what if we wreck this creek here, it's going to wreck everything downstream. So that interconnectivity is very important. But just like Dave, I'm a community member. I've been here my entire life, and I really value my understanding of how our community works. But I will never be able to truly understand the community needs and as they have put forward, because it changes, it adapts. This society around us is adapting and is changing. And so as long as we can keep that plan as a flexible plan to say, here we have a good path for the next 5 years, but after this, we're going to hand over the keys to the next generations, and we're going to trust that we've provided them with enough knowledge, enough value in their own ways of being, that they're going to carry this forward in a good way and honor the legacy of our ancestors. Because, what I've always loved to, when I talk to, my own children, when they asked me about forestry, they said, Dad, you're the president of our forestry company. And the first thing they asked me about was the same thing I asked another forester. What about clear cutting? You guys clear cut? And I was like, holy cow, you little 8-year-old, how do you know about all this stuff? But that's what it comes down to, is when I'm able to, and maybe this was my aha moment when it came to forestry, is when my children were asking me those tough questions, and I was able to answer because of those relationships I built with the Daves and the mix of the world. And they taught me about the value of the many values of a tree, the tree that stands there in its natural state, providing life and energy for the world, or the tree that, is not doing so well and it needs to be taken down, because if we don't, it's going to affect other trees and the health of the ecosystem around it. And so that stewardship and management, there is a connection there, but it's that relationship with the land and that we've always had. And this is, that profound kind of experience that our nation members will have when we talk about forestry, that we've always been foresters. We talk about our traditional dwellings, our pit houses, our tule mat lean-to structures. They're all based on wood foundations. And, some of the pit houses were very large, and they had, the really beautiful, log foundations that are enormous, but they're always covered with little, smaller trees. And that was part of our forestry practice. It wasn't just because we wanted a roof over our head. It was because we knew that the land needed to be thinned out, that trees would grow healthier if they had a little more space to grow, and they'd grow stronger if they had a little more space to grow. So we always did that. And the byproduct of that is that animals will travel through those areas. And so instead of chasing, the deer through the mountains and trying to slug through some really thick forest, no, you got a beautiful landscape where you can see, great distances, and where the animals are going to go because you created the paths for them. So that stewardship goes beyond, as Dave mentioned, the lumber goes beyond the timber value. It goes into that relationship with the land, that, connection and responsibility in a healthy way. Not that I can disrupt nature, but that I can work with it so that nature can thrive because I'm involved with it. And that's our responsibility as human beings now. We've upset the ecosystems around us so drastically that the only way to get back to some sort of revitalization is to make sure that we're involved with that as human beings and bringing it back to the natural state. And that's going to take, like I said, those localized approaches, where some areas we're going to have very high investments of time, of resources, of money. But other places, they're in better shape and they can be a little more naturalized in their natural state. But we have to understand that. And as Dave mentioned, you can't do that from the computer. You can't do that from the data sets that get sent to you. You have to be on the land to see what's happening there. And that's where the true healing takes place. And that's where collaborations and relationships will be forged moving forward.
Oh, I love it. I love the humbleness with which you guys are approaching this, and it's exciting to listen to you guys talk, and I think it's going to inspire a lot of other folks. So, thanks a lot, Jordan, for joining us. I think this is really, really great. People are going to love listening to what you got to say. So, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm sorry I have to leave so early. But
that's okay. No worries. So actually something that I wanted to ask Jordan, but obviously he was not available. Just out of curiosity, because I do this other podcast called Good Fire talking about cultural burning. Is that something that's been incorporated into the management area at all?
Yes, absolutely. We don't do much of it, just because we haven't been doing much of it for the past 100 years. Mm-hmm. But we're starting to get back into it, and we're working with some of the other communities, and hopefully within another, about 6 months or so, we're going to try to do one with the help of BC Wildfire Service as well, and see how that goes.
That's awesome.
Much of the area, because we've been putting fires out for 100 or plus, 100 years or more, we've got a lot of overgrowth in our forests around the communities. And if we were just to go to some of these right now and burn them, we'd end up with a conflagration, and it wouldn't be a good thing. So the approach that we've been taking is that we will go into some of these areas and we will actually thin them and remove some of the surface fuels and and then do the burn so that there isn't that huge accumulation of fuels that will go up.
Right.
And then that's something that you would come back and revisit every, 5 or 10 years and maybe do another burn and maintain the forest that way. So yeah, it is something that we're talking about, but it's nothing that we've really gotten into in a big way at this point in time. Some of the communities south of us have done more of that. But you will be seeing more of that as we move forward.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Just a side note. I wanted to dive into that because I know that's something that's had a bit of a cultural resurgence in the last 5 years or so. And so it's really cool to hear that BC Fire is on board with it too and lending a hand in whatever way they can. That's great. Really, really cool. Very cool.
Yeah. It's, we're, everything that we learned about fire is kind of changing too and evolving, and what we've been doing for the past 100 years obviously hasn't been working so well, so
you don't say.
We have to rethink
that. Yeah, for sure. So I want to get into the details around the real like forestry application of how one goes about, because I think philosophically forest management folks understand this concept of managing forests for all values as co-values rather than managing forests with non-timber values as constraints, right? I think everyone understands the idea of that and they like it and they want to move towards that, and they're not sure. It's a lot of fear, I find, just like they're not sure how to begin. They don't want to get caught screwing something up or doing something wrong. And so what does this look like to start doing the actual detailed forestry stuff with these other values in place? So like you said, water is a huge one for your community. What other values are there that you're trying to actively manage for that you want to highlight?
Well, Matt, you're a forester, so you understand that forestry is a world of trade-offs, and for everything you do, there's going to be a consequence. And one of the premises that we base our decisions on is our 7 generations plan that we've got in place. And the elders that I've spoken to have always said, when you're in the forest, Dave, you're making decisions that are going to affect that land for 7 generations to come. So understand the consequences of that decision, and what do you want that land to look like 7 generations from now. So understanding the values of the community, and the community that I work for is understanding that we might not get it right all the time. We'll be making mistakes as we move forward and adopting a new way of thinking about what we're doing on the land. So as long as you learn from those mistakes and move forward, we're making progress, and there's understanding about that. So
that's huge, by the way. Sorry, I just wanted to cut in. That's I think that's huge. I think that social license to try these things out, to try and promote new values, and be forgiven if it doesn't go wrong and they don't come at you with a knife, right? I think that's huge, is having that ability to try things that are new and different and maybe scary to some folks. So that's great. I'm glad that you guys are getting that opportunity. That's awesome.
Yeah, like you said, you mentioned that word, social license. It's imperative that you have that, because people won't be as forgiving if you don't. Mm-hmm. So that social license is something that takes a long, long time to earn, and just like a lot of those type of things, it can vanish in a second. Mm-hmm. So
keeping that trust is tough.
The tough part for a lot of foresters, at least just basing this on my own personal experience, is that a lot of us go into forestry because we like to be outside, we like trees, we like nature, but we're not always the best communicators.
Yeah, don't say that. That's something that I think that comes up all the time in the podcast, or at least in my personal life. At least in my personal life, right? We talk about how foresters are great at doing what they think is right, but not great about communicating and talking about it or anything like that. I think everybody can agree to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not comfortable pounding my own chest and saying, "Hey, look what I've done."
Yes.
And there's lots of us like that. I think for the most part, we're a bunch of introverts, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just kind of what we do, right?
Yeah,
and sure. It's a bit of a stretch sometimes to get up in front of a group that might not agree with what you're doing and try to understand where they're coming from and try to explain to them where you're coming from and find that common ground. It's training that we don't usually get, or at least we never did get at school when we went. So you learn on the fly.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I think is going to be, if it's not there now, it's definitely on its way in schools. I know I've been talking to a lot of professors about that kind of stuff, and the desire to add a communication, collaboration kind of, interpersonal skills segment to the forestry programs. Cause it's definitely become a major part of the job.
Exactly. And that's a good thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. For sure. And so let's keep getting into the details here. So, you're talking about, it's important to have those values up front, the communication with the community, the social license, the trust there to try things out, and hopefully it turns out the way, you want it to. And if it doesn't, then you try something else, and to have that freedom to be creative and try new things. So maybe you want to give some very specific examples of, like, say maybe there's a specific area that you had plans to harvest, but there was several, or maybe a bunch of different values that are unique to that area that you wanted to try to, manage for and promote while also removing timber or removing wood off the landscape. What did that end up looking like? Because I think the traditional approach in forestry is to, do natural disturbance kind of patterns, right? Like maybe you do it like a fire and you leave some residual and that kind of stuff. There's buffers, there's all kinds of things. So I want to know the specifics, the details around how you go about maybe a specific area.
Yeah, it's different everywhere we go, but
that's cool. I think that's important too, right? Is having that ability to do lots of stuff.
I kind of always come back to the levels of planning, I suppose, and understanding the in our case the silk principles of forest management. We are in the process as a larger within the nation itself to more clearly define what the principles are that guide us in our decision making process. And this all starts again at the landscape level. I know I keep saying that, but really that's what's important. Is to be able to, for lack of a better word, zone our forest land base into different zones. And as I mentioned earlier, water being the most important value on the land, we've zoned our old forest stewardship zone around water, and that incorporates a lot of other values as well. And so the areas that are outside of that particular zone are areas that we will often identify as locations for, potential cut blocks or some sort of forest management applications. And I can give you an example of an area where we work, where we do have a Westbank First Nation trapper who actively traps in a portion of our community watershed. And for him, marten habitat is critically important. So what we've done is in the particular ecosystem that we are working in, that he's very concerned about, is that we've, come up with a set of different silviculture systems that can be used in there that will, preserve coarse woody debris, forest cover, and whatnot to ensure that there is a habitat for the marten when we're finished. And that can be in the size of the cuplocks. For example, the cuplocks wouldn't be in excess of 5 hectares, and we'd be leaving a certain number of mature trees for retention and some wildlife habitat piles as well, which consists of just piles of coarse woody debris for habitat for the prey for marten, so the marten have something to eat. And then as long as there's some nesting or denning habitat for that marten as well, post-harvest, we've kind of met the objectives that the trapper is looking for. Mm-hmm. So translate that into our dry fur type, and there we have different concerns that we have to address the habitat for mule deer and ensuring that there's some winter range for it and enough trees left standing to provide interception for snow, so that the mule deer aren't wading through 3 feet of snow and trying to find something to eat, but that there's enough trees left behind in our cuplocks to ensure that they intercept enough snow so that the deer can scratch around and still find something to eat in the wintertime. Mm. So, and then we have everything in between, between that high elevation, wet forest ecosystem to the dry belt fir. And so we have our silviculture systems are based entirely on the biogeoclimatic zone in which we are operating. So we tailor make our prescriptions for that, and the values within the high elevation subalpine fir type are much different than the values in the dry belt fir type. So we adapt that way, and this is a silviculture. These silviculture systems are incorporated into our 7th generation plan. And then we also have management practices that we will incorporate into that old forest zone that I referred to, that in our part of the world, we cannot just set aside a section of old growth and let it be. If we do that, it's going to burn. It's just a matter of time before it burns. Right. So we have to actively manage those areas if we want to retain that old growth. And there might be opportunities to do a fire mitigation treatment or thinning treatment, something to prevent a catastrophic fire from wiping that old growth out. Historically, cultural burning has done that for us. In that, as Jordan mentioned, the forests are thinned and a lot of those ladder fuels and surface fuels are removed. And when a fire comes, it stays on the ground and doesn't get into the canopy and kill everything. You have trees there for hundreds and hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if that's a specific enough example for you, but there are certainly lots of other ones, and there are other stakeholders on the land and other community values that need to be protected, and we just adapt our silviculture systems to accommodate that, or we adjust our zoning process at the landscape level to accommodate that.
Gotcha. I liked what you said about. I really liked everything you said, but I really liked that one part about not putting old growth in a box and walking away, leaving it alone, right? Like I think that's the Western societies. We don't trust ourselves, right? That's the way we do things. We don't trust ourselves to do it right. So we're like, well, just like put it in a box, don't go in there, leave it be, it'll be fine. And it's like, you're right. Like inevitably there's going to be some kind of natural disaster. And so I think something that Gary Merkel had mentioned to me in a couple episodes that we'd recorded together was exactly that, right? It's like the reason people create parks is because they don't trust themselves to do the right thing. And so having that, you know what I mean? Like, so having that ability to, that foresight to be like, no, it's not that this is some wholly untouchable place. It's that this is part of the landscape and yes, we need it. And because we need it, we need to manage to make sure it sticks around, not just walk away and cross our fingers and hope, right? So that's an interesting perspective.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, as foresters, we tend to compartmentalize things, right? And that's something that I've learned from the people I work with is no, that's not the way to look at it. It's not like, this part of the forest has to be reserved for that, and this part for that, and this part for that. It's all interconnected, and we've been hearing that, but have we been practicing that?
Yes.
And that's the leap we have to take.
Very cool. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So, I would like to dive a little bit into the specifics around, the actual harvest and the actual, like, the numbers around there and where the revenue's going and that kind of stuff. So I think we should start actually. I didn't actually find who technically owns the community forest.
The community forest license is owned by Westbank First Nation.
Okay, it's owned by the First Nations. Okay, perfect.
Yes, and Intigeek Resources is a company. It's a limited partnership owned by Westbank First Nation. So, as Jordan mentioned, it's the corporate side of WFN, and we have a board of directors that we report to, and it's somewhat removed from chief and council, and so there is a bit of a firewall between the corporate side and the government side.
Gotcha. Okay. And I just wanted to start with that just so we have an idea. So say one goes in, you have this cut block that you've planned out and you're protecting all these values and trying to promote others. Like I know I watched one of the little documentaries you guys had online talking about doing, some selective logging stuff to promote shrub growth and open up the canopy for mule deer and moose, like you had said, and create moose browse and this kind of stuff. So when you talk strictly the business side of it, what is your guys' annual allowable cut? And are you guys making enough to cover costs? And if so, what's happening with the excess revenue? Is that going back into the community or is it going back onto the landscape? How is that working?
Well, we have two licenses. We've got our community forest agreement, and that has an annual allowable cut of 53,000 cubic meters.
Okay.
We have a replaceable forest license as well, which we intended to roll into our community forest, but we haven't made too much headway on that. We might be rolling that particular license into a First Nation woodland license instead here shortly. So combined, we have almost about 85,000 cubic meters.
Are you using all that?
No, we're not.
Oh, okay. There you go.
On the community forest, we're using close to that.
Mm-hmm.
On the replaceable forest license, we haven't been. Stumpage prices have made it uneconomical in many cases to log on the replaceable forest license. We don't have the economies of scale with a license of that size to actually make it profitable, especially in times where either log prices are really low or stumpage prices are really high.
Right.
It's tough to make ends meet.
Gotcha.
And that being said, we don't generally, meet our AAC. We're close some years, but most years we're undercutting what our AAC states.
Mm-hmm.
And where we would like to go to carry on with the practices that we're developing and the stewardship that we're conducting on the land, we would like to just basically leave a smaller footprint. And in order to do that, we need more area. We're not necessarily looking for more volume. Mm-hmm. We're looking for more area so that what we can do on the land is truly sustainable.
Gotcha.
So,
just a bit of a buffer in case of some kind of disaster or some unfortunate event, I suppose.
That and the fact that in many parts of our operating area, they've been harvested quite heavily. And if we want to maintain a cut, we don't want to necessarily take more out of an area than we feel is actually legitimized at this point in time. I mean,
gotcha.
It's basically a lighter footprint on the land, and if we were to sustain our AAC or harvest our AAC, we need a larger land base if we're going to have a smaller footprint, if you understand what I'm talking about.
I do. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Okay.
That's interesting. And I don't know how that compares to like industry or other community forests, but it seems like a reasonable approach. Like your goal isn't to hit the AAC so you can maximize profit every year. The goal is the landscape and the harvest is what pays for that. and allows it to exist. So I like that.
Exactly. My board of directors is not, profits are important, but they're not the most important thing. What's more important is ensuring the land is cared for. And that is a refreshing change from what I've been used to throughout my career, is that, we don't think maximizing your profits or the profits of the company is the number one objective for our company. Number one objective, Dave, is for you to take care of that land and look after the land for the best interests of Westbank First Nation. If you make profits, that's awesome. But if don't put that above everything else. So
I think that's an interesting problem that we have, right? Because I don't think that's something that industry intentionally does. It's just a side effect of kind of the capitalist model, right? Like it's kind of the way everything has to be efficient and leaner and that kind of thing. And it just kind of happens that way. And unfortunately, I think folks fall into that, and it's not always the best for those other values, like you said, right?
Absolutely. And it's not that I have anything against capitalism. I understand its role in society, for sure. Yes.
No, and me as well. Like I'm not definitely. I'm into capitalism. It's just more of a concept of like more thoughtful capitalism. Maybe is the better approach, right? If you talk to an economist, they would say that we're not incorporating the true cost of things if we're not including the cost to the environment long term, right? So that's one way to put it.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing to put a number on, right? What are the intrinsic values out there? And the other thing I was going to mention there too is that with the licenses that we have, it's certainly a long-term perspective. And the way our province has written laws and the responsibilities for the major licensees, or anyone with a forest license for that matter, or even us on a community forest, our legal responsibilities for our new stands after we harvest end at free growing, and that's all you have to do. And to have a longer term outlook, which we do on an area based license, you look much beyond that. You look until the next time you can actually go in there and harvest trees 120 years from that. Another thing I was going to mention too on the profit side is that, and on the maximizing of AAC, that's also secondary in the fact that we will let our stands grow beyond that maximum mean annual increment.
Oh, I see.
Just so that those second growth stands have an opportunity to provide some value to the land for an extra 20 or 25 years beyond that max MAI. To just to provide those values that are associated with an older mature stand.
No, absolutely. And I think I might want to point out what MAI is. I'm not sure if everybody listening knows what that is, but it's basically a point at which the growth increment has maximized. Right. So it's, I don't know. How would you explain it to someone who doesn't know?
I think you just did it. It's that point. Max MAI is when the rate of growth of a stand starts to slow down.
Right. And so normally that's the point at which we harvest. But you guys are saying that because you're putting a high value on non-timber values, you're allowing those to sit a little longer because you're seeing a huge benefit in those other values. So that's interesting.
That's absolutely true. But the other side of that is that you're also seeing an increment in value of that stand too over that time period. So you're harvesting more valuable trees when you actually get to the point of harvesting them. True.
Very interesting. I think it's important to talk about this business stuff because it's, as much as I think we're kind of on the precipice of a cultural or paradigm shift in the way we think about forest management. I think I think everyone's a lot of people are on board. It's just a matter of how do we pull the trigger on this at a large scale, right? I think having these examples and having, I think the holdup is always the business side, right? What is that going to cost to do that? That's always the question. And I think examples like Westbank and Wells Gray prove that, like, no, this can be done in a way that is very insightful, very inclusive, collaborative, and profitable. And I think that's important to point out. So, actually, what does happen with excess revenue? Does it go back into the community, or is there specific things? The reason I ask is because, like Wells Gray, they were saying all their excess revenue goes to some kind of a society of some kind, and they distribute that amongst the community. So I was wondering how that differs for you guys.
Yeah, it's quite similar in that once we finish every year and the financials are in, the excess revenue is actually in some cases transferred into another fund, and the community will make a decision on what to do with the excess revenue. It's not my decision,
Right.
and they are in the process. WFN itself is in the process of setting something up so that I'm not sure how it's going to look, but perhaps a committee that will decide how to distribute those funds or where those funds should go, or if there's a particular project that should be built or whatever. I mean, as far as my role goes, it ends at the end of the fiscal, and I start another one over again. And my board ensures that we have enough working capital within the corporation to keep us going in the event we have a really tough year coming up. And we always have enough in our reserves to ensure that we can carry out other practices that are not legal. I shouldn't say that way, but they're not legally required, let me say,
Sure.
such as spacing, pruning, fire mitigation that might not be funded. So we always have enough revenue to carry out some of those extras. But anything over and above that is a community decision as to where that money should be spent.
Very cool. No, that's great. I like knowing the details about all this stuff, kind of, from the very beginning to the very end of the cycle. How does this all work? Because I think it's important for folks that are trying to accomplish a type of change in what they're up to, like say mill or whatever. They want to know how this is working out, right? And I think this is exciting, very cool stuff. So, I guess we're kind of approaching the end of the discussion here, but what kind of to kind of put a cap on everything? I know you were talking a lot about all the learning that you have done and all of the need to stay humble and keep your mind open to new ideas. And even though you might not understand why something's going to happen, you do it because that's your mandate, right? And the community makes the decisions. So what kind of lessons do you think? I think there's a lot of lessons for industry here, right? The larger industry to take from this, but based off of what you've learned and the transitions you've made and how your perspective of forest management has changed over time, what would you suggest is a good course, or what would you like to point out to people that they should take time to learn themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question, Matt. I think it's a matter of opening your mind to new ideas. That despite the fact, as foresters, we go to school for several years and we learn a lot of Western science at that point in time, and we come out of school sometimes thinking that we're going to change the world, and with what we've learned in school. The fact is that there's another body of knowledge out there that we don't hear about in school, and that body of knowledge is local knowledge, and yes, some of that's Indigenous local knowledge, but there's also a lot of local non-Indigenous. Sorry, I keep getting little notifications here. We get there are a lot of people that have a lot of local knowledge that may not be Indigenous as well. And that's where we can learn a tremendous amount that you might not know otherwise, right? I mean, as foresters, many of us have worked in different parts of the province or Canada, and we move from place to place. And when you do that, you almost have to relearn a lot of things when you move to a new location, because there's that body of local knowledge that we cannot just ignore. And whether it's finding locations for locating line for a forest fire, or where there's very special habitat for certain species, or whatever the case may be, that's knowledge that you don't have by going to school. That's knowledge that you only understand by talking to the people that that are intimate with that land and what's on that land. So I think it's, as a forester today, we have to understand where we are in our world, what we know and accept what we don't know, and that we have to be talking with other people to fill that gap. And that's often the hard part of the job, I think, is to earn the trust from people that are out there to actually share that knowledge with you.
Mm-hmm. And put the ego aside. I think it's always important. I find for myself.
It's true for everybody, isn't it?
Yeah. Just put that ego aside and let things come in. And if you have an emotional response to something, it's probably because someone made a point.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But I appreciate that, Dave. That's, I think that summarizes the idea of the next kind of generation, the next evolution in forest management, and where it's going inevitably, and the exciting new opportunities that are going to arise from this. And I think you guys are it's a shining example of what's possible. And I just I'm excited for people to hear this. I'm excited for your guys' story to spread. I'm excited for to folks to learn this way and to try to incorporate it into the future, because I think it's inevitable.
Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And yes, it's evolving. Everything's changing, and it's changing fast. But yeah, exactly. It's exciting times.
It is. Well, thanks a lot, Dave. I really appreciate you taking the time for this. This was really, really excellent. And don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out if you guys, ever want to do this again or something.
You betcha, Matt. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for listening, folks. I enjoyed that thoroughly. I hope you did as well. I hope you learned something. I always do. And if you have any questions or concerns, shoot me an email, yourforestpodcast@gmail.com, and I will definitely get back to you. Make sure to rate and review and share this on social media. It gets the word out there. I really appreciate it. It is free content after all. It's the least you could do. Lots more exciting conversations to come. So remember to check back in next time. And thanks a lot for listening. Take it easy. See you next time.